What if we could do with college football, any given era, what that documentary crew did? To remind you what's happening on Sunday nights on ESPN is essentially a documentary crew followed around the Bulls in the 97-98 season, and they were given full access. And only now have they finished the product because Michael Jordan only a few years ago signed off on finishing the product. But basically what you're getting to see 20 some odd years, 25 years removed is what it was really like. And you get a full behind the curtain, peel back access look at what it was really like. So it's just fascinating, and it's what fans want. They want information and they want access. And this kind of content gives you both. We try and do it on our show. And we're really going to try right now. So here's what we took it upon ourselves to do. We took it upon ourselves to think, if we could apply that same blueprint to college football, what would you like to see? Now, obviously, we can't do this, but what would you have liked to have seen? I came up with a few. I'm going to name them for you right now. Now, to me, the title's everything here. Potential 30 for 30 or potential long-form documentaries. How about this one? Changing Lanes. Very, very creative with the title here, or at least we tried to be. I would love for a documentary crew to have followed Lane Kiffin from the time that he got left on that tarmac by USC to the time he crawled to Alabama to the time he won back-to-back SEC championships there as offensive coordinator, throwing his hands up in the air before the ball has even been released for a touchdown, and he gets his shot as a head coach again down at Florida Atlantic, and he convinces the people who need to be convinced that he's turned over a new leaf, thus the changing of the lanes, as mentioned in the title, and now he's back, and he's in the SEC as a head coach, and his message to you, to me, and to everyone else is, I'm a changed man. I've learned lessons in the past that I'm now going to be able to apply, and I'm going to be able to do a lot of the same things that maybe Ed Orgeron's doing right now. Orgeron wasn't a head coach capable of winning a national championship his first go-around as a head coach. Maybe he learned lessons and he's applying them now. Let's make no mistake, you can get a little bit better roster underneath your belt at LSU than you could at Ole Miss, or at least that's what people would lead you to believe. Maybe Lane Kiffin believes otherwise. Changing lanes. That's the first idea. Second idea, PS Bama is the title of this one. PS stands for a couple of things. PS stands for post-Stallings, and PS stands for pre-Saban. And what we're thinking about is essentially the wasteland, largely, that existed for Alabama as a program between the Gene Stallings era and the Nick Saban era. I don't need to remind you guys in Tuscaloosa what this consisted of, and it was not just a 2, 3, 4 year period. So what you would love to see here is you would love to see all the inner workings and the dysfunction, and they mixed an SEC championship in the midst of all this in 1999, but you had Mike Dubose, then you had Franchione telling you to hold the rope as he promptly drops the rope and goes to College Station, and then you had Mike Price have some fun in a hotel room and never coach a game, and then you have Mike Shula come in as NCAA sanctions are levied against the program, and so he actually does hold the rope, and Alabama's nothing to write home about. They briefly had a blip in 2005 where they went undefeated deep into the season. I think they ultimately went to the Cotton Bowl that year. But then you conclude this. You could be a 50-parter for all I care. You conclude this with Mal Moore being able to go get Nick Saban. And remember, before that, it looked for all the world like it was going to be Rich Rodriguez, only to find out that his wife was scared away from the culture in Tuscaloosa. And so, we're back on the market, and so we make a second run at Nick Saban, and we get him. Tell me that wouldn't be something that was worth watching. Third idea, the best that almost was. This is all about Mark Richt. Mark Richt, I have stated on this show within the last month, is a guy that I feel was unfairly criticized somewhat in his time at Georgia. And the reason that I don't feel like he was given his proper due, and I do feel like he's unfairly compared to Kirby Smart, is because Kirby Smart has access to resources that Mark Richt was never given access to. The credit goes to Kirby Smart here for convincing the people that needed to be convinced in Athens to get off their hip pocket and get off their pride and get off their sweater vest a little bit and fully invest. Because if you want Alabama results, you got to have Alabama investment. Mark Richt, for whatever reason, was never fully able to convince the powers that be at Georgia to invest Sunday through Friday, as I always like to say, to the degree that it took to match the results that Alabama was getting on Saturdays. But that didn't matter to people. They still held him to that standard. And I think about 2012, Very, very classic SEC championship game, really famous. Alabama takes a late lead. It was A.J. McCarron to Amari Cooper, and then Aaron Murray trots out there for Georgia, and they got a little bit of time left, and they're driving down the field, and they get down inside the 10, and Gary Danielson's yelling, oh, they're going to have 2 throws to the end zone. The only problem being one of those throws is tipped at the line of scrimmage. Some Georgia fans inexplicably suggest that the receiver should drop the ball on purpose, even though he's never trained like that in his life, and the most aware football player on the planet wouldn't know to do it. Ball falls, or receiver falls with ball completed, no timeouts left, clock hits 0, Alabama goes to Miami, and bloodbaths Notre Dame, which I believe Georgia also would have done had they gone to Miami. How different would history be, is my question. If Mark Richt ends up with one more play, let's say they win the game, just hypothetically, let's say they win the game, and he goes to Miami and they win a national championship against Notre Dame. How different are things there? Of course, Mark Richt is remembered differently. Think about how different Les Miles is remembered because he won a championship. Championships are, I don't need to say this, it's the most obvious statement in the world, but championships are really important. How important was Jimbo Fisher's championship in 2013? You think he's getting $75 million guaranteed? And a lot of those folks, by the way, that guaranteed that $75 million did it because they were so confident in the consistency of the price of oil at the time. You watch the news this week? Jimbo's got it guaranteed. He doesn't care. He's not invested in oil. He's invested in football. So I just wonder, because a lot of people look at Mark Richt's time at Georgia and they say couldn't get the job done. Okay, I mean, that's one way to look at it. Technically, no, they didn't get the job done. But what's the difference? In the caliber he had the program at, what's the difference in having time for one more play or having a timeout in your back pocket? My point is, it's thinner than a piece of paper. Like, Georgia was good enough to win a national championship that year. They didn't. They didn't win it. Alabama was that much better on that given Saturday. But there's a wide gulf between the revisionist perception of what Mark Richt was versus what the perception would be of him had they won that championship, which I always think's unfair. I don't think that way, but I digress. Move on. By far my favorite title I came up with, it was approved by Colin, who is a lot better film critic than I am. We're going to just throw out Slouching Tiger, Hidden Champion on you right here in front of God and everyone. Slouching Tiger, Hidden Champion is going to chronicle simultaneously Dabo Swinney's rise to prominence at Clemson and Ed Orgeron's rise to prominence at LSU. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a documentary crew follow each guy, and we're going to chronicle all of the things that were said about Dabo Swinney those first few years. Do you remember when West Virginia dropped 70 on them in the Orange Bowl? You remember when Florida State came in there and just pasted them in Death Valley? All of this stuff happened. Like, Dabo Swinney was not a national champion overnight. It took a while. And he sounded kind of goofy at times. And before he was winning championships, people took their shots at him. Same way with Ed Orgeron. That's the reason I call it Slouching Tiger, Hidden Championship, instead of Crouching, because that's kind of how people would caricature both of these guys. Just kind of, aw shucks, howdy doody, oh, it's really good for the flavor of the sport, but no one's really taking them seriously. And now both of them are national champions. Dabo's won, a couple of them. Ed Orgeron looks like he's at the party to stay, and he just had probably the best season that any of us have ever seen in the history of college football. But what's most fun about this documentary is not even following the coaches themselves. Partly it is, because partly it's fun to watch them publicly play into this false persona and narrative that media has created around them. You think they're dumb? They're happy to let you think that, when behind the scenes they're running some of the highest performing organizations in the sport. That's part one. Part two of what's fun about this is to follow the same people at the beginning of Ed Orgeron's career or Dabo Swinney's career who put out all these national headlines about what a cluster you-know-what it was to hire this guy or that guy, or how far behind their program's going to be to, at the time, Florida State for Dabo, or Alabama as it relates to Ed Orgeron, and then watch the same ones think that they can just whitewash history and dare to wag their finger at you after these guys have the results and say, shame on anyone who doubted these coaches. Well, this documentary throws a great big mirror in front of every one of their faces, so that would be fun. And how about number 5? Now, this is one I was really close to. I'm going to call it, I'm not crazy about the title, I'm open to change, Gus's Fall for All. We're going to rewind to 2017. I think I just talked about this like a month ago. This was a period of time, the fall of 2017 was a period of time where quarter to midway through the season, Auburn goes down to LSU. They build a 20-0 lead. LSU comes roaring back. I think the final was 27-21. Talked about the scene in the post-game press conference afterwards. Half the Auburn beat guys are trashing Malzahn so loudly that Christy Malzahn, his wife, leaning on the door over here, can hear it. To her credit, she didn't say anything. She just stood there. And so everyone's got him on the hot seat. I cannot stress enough how much of a foregone conclusion it was in people's minds that this was it for him. He was going to be done. The only question was, are they going to let him finish the season? 5 weeks later, he's beating Georgia, number 1 team in the country, Georgia. He's pasting them like 40-17 or something like that. And then 2 weeks later, he beats number 1 Alabama. First time in history of college football, you've beat number 1 teams 2 times in a 3-week period. And then the week of the SEC championship game, because they won the West, week of the SEC championship game, this guy has gone from being on the hot seat and, the Auburn websites putting up hot boards for who the next head coach is going to be, to backing Auburn into a corner, and his representation effectively backing Auburn into a corner saying, we want a new deal. And we want it agreed to, at least in principle, before we play Georgia in Atlanta this Saturday. That would be very, very, very fun to watch. So those are the 5 hypotheticals. That's the dream list of documentaries that I would really love to see there.